essentially the way we're structured from the product perspective is we have our vertical teams, for instance, hunt, off-road, backcountry, and then we have our domain teams, which are horizontal. So growth is a horizontal service. It's like an amazing opportunity, but also really challenging because you effectively have 4 businesses that you're supporting. One thing that our engineering manager brought in that I loved was like, how do we empower the team and almost require the team to be putting forth experiment ideas so that it's not just PMs. So we have this whole process around the experiment idea review where now like it's an expectation that anyone on the team is bringing a one-pager that is an experiment that they want to run. The first problem to solve was the velocity, just like get the velocity up. But then once you start to like have your metrics around velocity, impact, and win rate, you can start to then tune the system based on what you're optimizing for. And now we're in like the tuning stage.
Welcome to Subversive, a podcast dedicated to sharing stories from the best consumer subscription apps in the world. We'll bring you lessons for how to grow your consumer subscription business, including insights and inflection points that led to exponential growth from leaders at category-defining companies and innovative startups. Let's get into the show. My guest today is Brandon Gador, product growth lead at onX. In this episode, I talked to Brandon about the growth levers that have allowed onX to build one of the largest and most popular outdoor apps in the world, about its contrarian strategy to building vertical specific products across hunting, fishing, off-roading, and backcountry skiing, and about how this approach has attracted a different set of target customers, allowing the company to differentiate itself versus AllTrails. All right, welcome Brandon Gador to the Subversive podcast. I'm really excited to have you on today, not just because we're old friends. We've known each other many years now. We both lived in Colorado for a while, but also because I'm really excited about onX and everything you all are doing in the outdoor space. We had Ron Schneiderman from AllTrails in as one of our first guests several months ago now. And so excited to hear about another rapidly growing outdoor app in onX. But before we jump in, Brandon, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about your background and how you found your way to this company?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much, Phil, for having me. I appreciate it. And yeah, that was a great episode with AllTrails. Big fan of everything that you're doing with the community you're building around growth and the podcast and your classes. So thank you for all that. And thanks for having me. But yeah, so I joined onX in 2023. And for the folks that don't know, onX is basically a digital mapping product. And we serve outdoor adventurers who are looking to get out in the outdoors and enjoy it. And we do this through a mobile app. So we have several different mobile apps out there that are geared towards hunters, fishermen, off-roaders, backcountry skiers, hikers, overlanders. So we kind of serve a wide variety of users with these different mobile apps that we have.
Yeah, and I've been following you guys from afar for a few years now. Before we jump into onX, would love to hear a little bit more around your product experience at other companies prior to joining the company. And then I know you're an avid hunter and outdoorsman yourself. And so how did that factor into your decision to go work there?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different background, jumping into the GIS and mobile space. But yeah, a lot of my work prior to onX was in the FinTech space. So I kind of fell into product through a rotational program at Intuit. And that was like an amazing place to learn product and kind of the focus on like good foundational PM skills, but then ultimately wanted to move to like a more B2C type space. And that's what brought me to Lending Club. And it's kind of interesting because like the companies I've been at now have all been kind of in this like scaling startup stage. And it was like unintentional, but the last 3 jobs I've had have been in that phase. Mm-hmm. And so Lending Club was like, I joined about like being the 5th PM. And by the time I left, there was about 60. Mm-hmm. And then, with Gusto, there was like 12 to 14 PMs at the time. And by the time I left, there was over 60. And then, now I'm on that same path with onX as far as like in that growth stage. But yeah, prior to onX, a lot of the work in FinTech. And I think what was always hard there is that, like for Gusto, like I love the SMB space and that customer, but it's really hard to put yourselves in the shoe of somebody trying to run payroll every 2 weeks. And me being, a hunter, fisherman, backcountry skier, mountain biker, like, all those types of things that we can do. I've been a longtime user of onX. And so that's what really drew me to the product and the opportunity to come here.
Well, and one other question I'll ask you, because I know the backstory on this, you built your own app at one point in the hunting and outdoor space. So can you say a little bit around that app and what you learned from that experience? And then, what you love about getting to work on your passion every day now with onX?
Yeah, totally. So mobile has always interestingly been a thread throughout my career. Like even at Intuit, I was working in mobile there as well.
Hmm.
Um, and then launched the first mobile ad at Lending Club. Didn't get to do that much at Gusto, but I've always had these like passion projects on the side to scratch my own itch.
Hmm.
And yeah, I worked on a project called Quiver, which was essentially like think of a Strava but geared towards whitetail hunters. And it was a chance for me to take like my product skills but apply it to a space and problem that I knew deeply. And then, I'd always had my eye on onX, and it was something, I was always just kind of watching them to see like if opportunities would show up, because like for me, that was always the goal. Like, how could I combine my product skills and that work there to like my own personal passion and interests? Because like, again, I love Gusto, but I don't wake up every day thinking about payroll.
Yeah.
But I do think about these other things a lot. And so the opportunity came up. I had the side project with Quiver, but really it was like the chance to marry the two with coming to onX.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I mean, both because life is short and getting to work on something you enjoy obviously makes life a lot more fulfilling. But I also think as a product leader, it's such an unfair advantage when you're working on a product that you intrinsically want to use every day, every week, every month. It just makes you so much better at your job. So I think that's a good segue into onX. And on every episode of Subversive, we talk about an inflection point or a set of inflection points that drive exponential growth for a business. So in your case, onX raised its Series A in 2018, and since then, my understanding is it's grown ARR more than 10x, expanded the team more than 300%. You joined, I believe, in 2022 or 2023. So let's just start with what have been some of the most important growth channels and levers for onX since they raised that Series A back in 2018.
I think maybe we can start with a little bit of the history of onX as well too. So onX started as basically a chip that you could plug into your GPS device. And so Eric, the founder, really wanted to try to solve this unique problem around knowing where you stand on public or private land boundaries. And so he started with a chip business, like basically a chip where he would write all the data onto this chip, and you could plug it into your GPS device. And then with the advent of the iPhone, all of a sudden you can now start having a GPS device on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever used a GPS device, like they're pretty clunky, the screen's horrible, you
Mm-hmm.
can't interact with it. So now all of a sudden you have like a fully featured GPS device on your phone with all the rich, of the screen and all the interaction, which really was like a game changer at the time. And I think like that's still like solving that unique problem and being in the right kind of right time, right place has fueled so much of the growth. And I think with all these things, when it comes to growth, it always comes back to like the core product, and is it solving a really important problem in a easy way? And for the Hunt app, that continues to be true. And so like our word of mouth, and just like because the product does such a good job at that, is still like our strongest driver of growth, because it is solving that problem really uniquely.
Yeah, I love that. And I've seen that a number of times now on this podcast. We recently had Albert Chang, who's now the head of growth or chief growth officer at chess.com. And he was saying how Eric Alabest, who's one of the co-founders of chess.com, he just had this passion for chess from the time he was very young. And the company was founded, I think, back in 2005. So it's one of these that have been around 2 decades now. And I see
Mhm.
this more and more in consumer subscription because unlike B2B SaaS or marketplaces where the competitive realities of those markets is such that you're either growing at hyperspeed or you're dying. With these consumer subscription businesses, if you have an authentic passion for a space and you can figure out a way to monetize it, then oftentimes it's not necessarily the fastest company. It's the one that sort of sticks around for long enough and builds a product people really love that ultimately ends up winning. And it sounds like that's been key, not only to onX's success, but also to all the word of mouth that the company has driven. As long as we're talking about acquisition, I want to talk a little bit about SEO as well. I know SEO has played a very important role for AllTrails. And I talked to Ron a little bit about how hyper-local search queries for local hiking trails was really important for their growth, both in the US and then later on internationally. To what extent has SEO been an important driver for onX?
SEO has played a role, but it's not like, super critical like it is in the AllTrails model, where they have this large freemium base and you really can't go anywhere without running into an AllTrails page, right? Like, we're going to Telluride this weekend, and like, there's no way I was not running into an AllTrails page trying to figure out
Mm-hmm.
what to do. And like, it's amazing. They do an amazing job with that SEO and then bringing you into the product and upgrading you. But for us, like, we do some SEO work around like our trail content for our off-road product and also for our backcountry, but it hasn't been like a core part of the growth model as in other products. Like I think another key thing for us from like a channel perspective has been the ambassadors in the community. Like in the hunting space, our brand is up there with the largest brands that are there, largely because of how great a product it is, but also just like the ambassadors and influencers are all using it and talking about it. So that's been a big part of the strategy for hunt into off-road and into backcountry. And then obviously paid too. Like we rely on paid as well. But it really is that word of mouth. And then within the communities that really drives a lot of that growth.
Got it. Well, you mentioned influencers in the hunting space in particular, as well as you have these other verticals we're going to talk about, like fishing and off-roading. Um, to what extent are you paying some of these individuals who have a lot of influence in the hunting space through UGC ads to sort of go on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram and talk about onX versus they're just doing it organically of their own volition because they love the product so much? Or is it a mix of both?
It's a mix of both. You have your hobbyists that like are sharing things. And again, like hunt is a little unique because you're not always going to be sharing like what you're doing in the app because you don't want to share your spots.
Mm-hmm.
But like in off-roading, like if you ran this amazing trail and you had this awesome adventure, you might share that as somebody around this like incredible trip that you had. So like your hobbyists are definitely out there sharing it. And then we are paying influencers, to help spread the word of onX. So it's definitely a mix of both.
Got it. Very cool. Well, and then let's talk a little bit about the expansion onX has undergone over the last many years from a pure play hunting app
Mm-hmm.
for hunters to a broader cross section of outdoor lovers. And that could be hiking, it could be off-roading, it could be fishing, it could be other outdoor activities. To what extent has the company's tremendous growth over the last 6-7 years been driven by that core hunting category versus all of these other verticals you're expanding into?
It's going to be both. I think like, as I understand it, like in 2019, a decision was made, like instead of building a one-to-many type app, like, a Strava or something, we're going to build these individual products that are going to solve the unique needs of these types of users in this space and be really tailored to their experiences. And so kind of the birth of that was the second app that came off of Hunt, which was Off-Road. So
Mm-hmm.
Hunt continues to be the most mature and longest standing business that we have. But like with hunting, there's only 13 million tags that are bought a year. And for the audience that doesn't know, a tag is your license to go out and harvest an animal. So there's a cap there, right? So like that's what's interesting with the spaces that we play is like there's a certain amount of TAM available. And so we have to figure out if like onX, the parent company, wants to continue to grow, we have to figure out new ways to grow in these other verticals. And so the next kind of adjacent spot that the company went to was off-roading, where now you're in the vehicle. What kind of data can we get from a trails perspective to fuel your adventure to go out and run these trails, whether you're like a hardcore off-roader or you're an overlander and, into camping. And then what came after that then was the human powered space, really starting with backcountry skiing. And so that we've had those three apps for the last couple of years. And then this year we launched a fishing app. And so it's really tailored towards, still water fishermen in the Midwest. So I think you're from Minnesota, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Got my
And I'm from
Vikings hat right here.
No, no,
Boo,
geez.
Packers.
I married into a Vikings family. It's brutal. But so with fishing now, they're going after, like, they started with Minnesota. Now then they opened up to Wisconsin. I think we're in like 5 states now.
Uh-huh.
But I think what's really interesting is like your classic horizon strategy where you have these different businesses at different stages. And then from a growth perspective, and we'll get into this probably talking about some of like how we're structured, but we work across these businesses. And so we get to see kind of what's working, what's not working, and build upon the different like mechanics in these businesses, as well as like apply learnings of what's happening over here to over there. So it's really interesting from like just a growth perspective when we're working in that space.
Yeah. Well, so I want to dig deeper into this very specific question around multiple apps versus a single app, right? And I think in many ways, onX took a contrarian approach because the vast majority of consumer subscription businesses I know, even if they function across multiple verticals, they have a single app. It's just much easier to maintain. It's easier to point users towards a single product. But there are exceptions to that. We've worked with my client business. We've worked with Outside, which now owns Map My Run and Map My Fitness, and so they have run, they have walk, they have cycling, and they have fitness broadly defined. And so there are a few examples you can find. And I'm curious on your perspective on the pros and cons of that approach. What do you like about it, and where are there some challenges that have needed to be overcome?
It's fascinating because I get asked this question all the time just by like my peer group and friends because they do multiple activities. They're like, I would want one app. Like, why do you have these multiple apps? Um, but it's been a key part of our strategy so that we could go deep in a particular use case. So like deep for off-roaders, where it's not just like a reskin of the Hunt app, but it's like built for like what are the problems we solve for an off-roader.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can be way more intentional around the product, catering to these particular personas and what are their use cases. Cause like for a hunter, there's different types of personas of hunters. And that's just like, we should be solving that problem in different ways versus like an off-roader who has it in their vehicle pinned up on the dash.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like what it affords is like deep focus for a particular user, and you're not making sacrifices across all these audiences. So that you have like some part of the experience that just doesn't feel native to like what you're trying to use it for. But on the flip side, like we're effectively trying to grow 4 different businesses right now with underneath the umbrella of onX.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard. Like as a growth team, we work with 4 different groups of stakeholders and 4 different, ways that we're trying to grow. And even within those businesses, we say vertical. When I say a vertical, I mean like one of these businesses. That's like our terminology for them, or one of these apps. But they have multiple personas within that. And so like what ends up working in like the way it works is we bring the growth expertise and like how to apply it and the learnings that we've been learning elsewhere. And then the vertical brings their expertise on the persona, and we kind of bring those 2 worlds together to launch experiments and work on these types of things. But I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. Like it, at times I crave just being able to work on one and like go deep on one. But it's also just I think it's a really interesting strategy that we'll see how it plays out over time. Because you're right, we have taken a completely different approach than some of these other apps.
Well, and one other thing I would love to layer into the conversation is I think as AI is taking off and the cost of building a new app or digital product is rapidly coming down, I could see more companies start to experiment with this approach because the cost of maintaining 4 different app infrastructures and 4 different app UIs used to be prohibitively high. And so very few companies would go that path, even if it was ultimately better for the end customer. But now the game is changing a little bit on that front. So we'll see how it all plays out.
One other thing to add to that too is like, I think now we're getting to the point of the economies of scale of it, where like we've been heavily investing in the platform that sits underneath all this. So to give you an example, we launched our Fish app this year, and out of the box, like it comes with CarPlay, Android Auto, and all these like a rich feature set that would have taken you multiple years to build if you were starting from scratch. And so I think, we're it's still an opportunity for us, but we're getting more and more mature on our thinking around like the platform investments and then how do we scale that into the different businesses.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because even if you have 4 separate mobile apps, the reality is the UI and the UX might look a little bit different, but underlying those 4 consumer products, you have shared infrastructure, in some cases, shared data models, and shared back-end services that can lead to a great user experience like CarPlay integrations, for example. So that makes a lot of sense. You already alluded to this, but the growth team that you took over when you joined in early 2023 has needed to evolve significantly over the last couple of years as well. And it sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's needed to adapt both to the needs of different stakeholders across these 4 different verticals, but it has also needed to adapt to the company as a whole, just getting larger and having more ambitious goals. So what does that look like?
An interesting thing about our structure, and this started to happen right when I joined, but essentially the way we're structured from the product perspective is we have our vertical teams, which sit in a vertical, and like, for instance, hunt, off-road, backcountry, like those are the vertical teams. And then we have our domain teams, which are horizontal. Growth happens to be one of those domain teams. Our foundational experiences is a domain team. There's about 4 of us. So growth is a horizontal service. And so that's what makes it really interesting. It's like an amazing opportunity, but also really challenging because you effectively have, four businesses that you're supporting. Now we prioritize based on impact and like where we can, learn the quickest, but it doesn't mean that fourth vertical is reaching out with questions or they're looking for help
Mm-hmm.
in certain areas. And that set of stakeholders is completely different than, the largest vertical that you work with. So I think that has been like an evolution of our team. And I constantly go back and forth with like our engineering manager and design leader around like, do we go vertical specific? Like, do we start to just pivot our team and have like a PM and group just go deep on a vertical,
Mm-hmm.
or do we remain horizontal? And where we've landed and how we've structured the team is really kind of around the key points of where we could have the most impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it started with like trying to just understand like the growth loops, where's the most amount of leverage, and then how do we start to point, groups of people at that particular problem and give them the space to run at it. And so we've really organized kind of around the customer journey
Mm-hmm.
today, and we've been in a horizontal structure that way. And what that affords us is the ability where like if we've built it in a way where if we can find some pay dirt with a certain type of experience in one vertical, we can very quickly bring it to one of these other verticals. Same thing goes from the client perspective, like iOS and Android and web. And so that gives us a lot of like flexibility and scale to like land a lot of impact that way when we do find some winners. Now the challenge is that like what we're learning is not all experiments are going to behave the same
Mm-hmm.
across clients and verticals.
Yep.
So it's really amazing when you can hit something across all like both iOS, Android, and it's a winner across these verticals. But that's rare because the personas are different, and each of these businesses are at different scales or like on their growth. They're different stages of their growth curve.
Yep.
The other thing I'd say too is like another big part of what we've been doing is really focusing on the experimentation muscle. So the team was already experimenting and very interested in it, but we really had to like lean into experimentation as like our process for delivering impact and learning. And so part of that then was building trust with the rest of the stakeholders around what we're doing. So to give you an example, I think growth was at a different stage. The term of growth and how growth was treated was at a different stage. And so like we would get, when I first joined, we get a lot of questions around like, well, what are you going to build? And tell me what your roadmap looks like and what specifically things are you going to build? And we couldn't tell them that. Like let's align on the problem to solve and the metric you want us to move.
Mm-hmm.
And then through our process, we're going to run a ton of experiments against that and try to move that metric. Which was pretty terrifying, I think, for folks at first, because like they, I built no trust or relationship with some of these folks. But really by like amplifying our experimentation process, we've been able to build that trust and relationship, and then stack wins in there that have given us more and more freedom to operate in these different areas. So yeah, it's definitely been an evolution.
Yeah, two key insights I'm extracting from everything you just said. One is the best growth teams tend to be oriented around the user journey. It's not always the case, but I think often you have growth teams, and that can include both product growth and marketing growth, that tie to particular parts of the journey, everything from top of funnel user acquisition to user registration and activation to engagement and retention, and then ultimately to monetization, which often means subscriber conversion and retention. And that's just because you're able to run certain playbooks and identify certain insights at different parts of those user journeys that ends up being pretty transferable. And then the second insight is being a product leader of any kind, but in particular, being a growth product leader is challenging for many reasons, but one of them is you're pulled in so many different directions. And so at any tech company, you're being tapped by the marketing team, by the design team, by the engineering team, by the data science and analytics team, by the executive team. If you're a B2B or a consumer product, by the sales team, right? And so you're already pulled in all of these different directions functionally. At onX, it sounds like you have the added challenge of being pulled across different verticals. And so really the only way to solve that problem is by developing a set of processes that are highly repeatable and transferable. And often what that means is just getting really good at high velocity experimentation and at interpreting A/B test results so that you can drive impact, which it sounds like was one of your big focus areas in your first 6 months.
Not for 6 months. I would say first 6 months was just like understanding the business and like really trying to get deep from the customer side.
Hmm.
I'd say in this last year, we've really improved and focused on the experimentation side. And
Mm.
so a couple things there is, um, one thing that our engineering manager brought in that I loved was like, how do we empower the team and
Hmm.
almost require the team to be putting forth experiment ideas
Hmm.
so that it's not just PMs.
Yep.
And so we have this whole process around the experiment idea review where now like it's an expectation that anyone on the team is bringing a one pager that is an experiment that they want to run.
Yep.
And we stole this from Pinterest, but like it's been a way to really democratize the ideas, so that we have so it's not just PMs coming up with the ideas. And
Yep.
then similarly, like when a stakeholder comes and they want to run an experiment or have an idea, it's like, great, here's a template, fill it out, come join our idea review, and then let's see where we go with that. Um, and then on the flip side, like we've invested a lot in our actual A/B testing infrastructure and the results because that needed some shoring up as well.
Hmm.
Um, and I know we were talking throughout this whole process, and like the first problem was to solve was the velocity, just like get the velocity up.
Yep.
Um, but then once you start to like have your metrics around velocity, impact, and win rate, you can start to then tune the system based on what you're optimizing for. And now we're in like the tuning stage
Yep.
where um, we're not just like going for like as many experiments as possible. It's like what's the right win rate, and are we putting enough big wins out there?
Yep. I love that. Well, and I'm glad
Mhm.
you brought up Pinterest. If you didn't bring it up, I was going to, because what you talked about in terms of, okay, it's not just the PMs who are sourcing experiment ideas. It can be engineers, it can be designers, it can be analysts. That's exactly what I saw John Egan do when he was leading the growth team at Pinterest. And he came from an engineering background. Like he
Mhm.
was, I think ultimately he led the entire growth team, but he was by training a growth engineer. And oftentimes the best ideas don't come from the PMs because they're a little bit too close. And so being able to democratize the brainstorming of A/B test ideas is really powerful. Well, let's talk a little bit more around some of the specific experiments and growth levers you all have implemented since you joined the company in 2023. So the company recently raised a Series B round. I think it was an $87 million Series B in 2022. I guess to start with, how did that impact the company's resourcing, growth trajectory, and product roadmap? Like you came in shortly after that, and so what was your remit coming in on the heels of such a big funding round?
Yeah. So the other thing that I came in on the heels of was the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of outdoor companies experienced this like boom during the pandemic where everybody was getting outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think at the time there was a lot of like, well, what's going to happen post pandemic? And, onX has continued to grow really strong even post pandemic, like from a revenue and, active subscriber perspective. And so, like, but with that, I feel like onX has been very thoughtful from the growth side as far as like headcount.
Mm-hmm.
And, like as I mentioned in the beginning, this is like my third scaling startup that I've been
Mm-hmm.
at. And so I've been in modes where it's like throwing bodies at problems and you're just
Mm-hmm.
constantly interviewing. That hasn't been the case here. I think the leadership team's been really thoughtful around how we think about growth from just like a human perspective. And are
Mm-hmm.
we hiring the right people for these different types of roles? And then separately, like what the other like kind of things that we've gone after from a growth perspective are is, so last year there was an acquisition of Trout Routes,
Mm-hmm.
which is geared towards fly fishermen and
Mm-hmm.
women. And so that was like a new part of it. And then it also helped us spin up and scale our fish product. So we just launched
Mm-hmm.
fish at the beginning of this year. And so that continues to play into like the horizon strategy of these different types of verticals. And so I would say those have been like kind of the main things that I've been able to see from a growth perspective.
Got it. Yeah, that must be so much fun to be. I mean, we talked about the challenges, but getting to work across these different verticals and different target customers. Um, what are some of the experiments, to the extent you can share, what are some of the specific experiments that the growth team has run over the last couple of years since you joined? And have there been any particular successes that drove outsized impact?
This is also interesting too, kind of something we touched on in the beginning, but one folly of being really close to the customer and sometimes being the customer is um, you can't skip some of those foundational steps of a PM, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, there's some shortcuts we can make in some certain areas, but because we think we know who this user is. But like, I signed up for this app in 2014, and the people we're signing up today are completely different. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think a one of the things that we've been focusing on a lot at the tail end of last year to this year is getting deeper into the customer research.
Mhm.
And you just can't skip that step, even if you think you know the customer really well. Like, just there's nothing more valuable than watching people go through your onboarding flow and
Mhm.
the questions that they have. And so, like, I can't stress that enough, because like that has unlocked a lot of small iterations that led to outsized gains, but also bigger changes where we're making way bigger swings in certain areas that haven't proven out yet. But a lot of that was based on the customer research.
Mhm.
And then, the other, I'd say the other area where has been like where we've seen a lot of traction, and this is going to be obvious to folks that listen to podcasts around this stuff, is around the paywall.
Mhm.
Um, and it's all the metrics that you hear everyone else talk about, but like that paywall view rate, that's such a critical thing. And like getting
Yep.
that to 100% of all new users seeing that is like one of the biggest things that you can do. Um, and then, I think another key thing that we've been focused on is just like, how do we simplify? Just
Mhm.
simplify, and just like really break down these screens to like what they are.
Mhm.
Um, and so, um, and with that, the other thing I'd say too is like, and this is what we always say to our team whenever we see a test that performs around this, is like, don't sleep on copy. Like
Mhm.
any copy changes around the CTA, like have been really successful. And so we're always telling our team, like, just don't sleep on copy experiments. Like, if you, like, again, when it goes back to those metrics you're optimizing for on like the velocity, like, what's your portfolio of experiments that you're running? Like, what are the bigger swings that you have lined up, and how are
Mhm.
you slipping in, smaller copy experiments along the way?
Yep. Yeah, there's so much great stuff in there. I mean, one, as somebody who's been living and breathing consumer subscription apps for many years now, it's funny because you look at all these different products and it's easy to say, well, they're all special snowflakes. And to some extent they are. But when you really boil it down, there are a handful of things that drive the majority of impact on growth for consumer subscription apps: pricing and packaging, onboarding, paywalls, lifecycle marketing communications. There are a few others, but like those are the
That's
things.
it.
Those are the things I work on with all my clients. And more often than
Yep.
not, when I talk about growth on these podcasts, it comes down to one of those handful of things. And so it sounds like you've seen a lot of that at onX. And then I love your point around don't sleep on copy, because it's so easy to overlook. And you brought up Pinterest earlier. I mean, they built this whole copy tune tool that like iteratively went through millions and millions of iterations on copy, not just domestically in the US, but across other languages and other markets. And it was so powerful for them. So it is one of those things that's easy to overlook, but it could be really powerful. Um, how do you balance the need to keep the product simple enough for new users who are coming to onX for the first time, and you don't want to overwhelm them with too much complexity, but then at the same time serving your power users who maybe do want a little bit more feature richness and functionality?
Yeah, I would say that's a problem we're still working on. And we are like a feature rich product. Like, our persona is the objective oriented user that's going to go out for, like, is very goal oriented and wants to go do these things. And so we're like, there's a deep bench of features there. And I think the problem that we're focused on now is like, how do we further simplify this? And particularly for onboarding, this is a problem that we're working on. Where today, when you land on the map in our product, we throw the kitchen sink at you, and
Mm-hmm.
we really need to start to strip that down. So like, how do we, like, nudge the user into the right flows so that they can start to grok what this product is? And it's interesting, like when we were doing the research, we like that I mentioned earlier, like we were talking originally, we've been talking about the first 30 days. Like, what is it like for a user in the first 30 days? And the research was like, you guys, it's the first 30 seconds. Like
Mm-hmm.
the 30 seconds is like, I don't care about the 30 days. It's like the 30 seconds that matter.
Yeah.
And so this is where it's also been interesting as like a growth team, where we're starting to step into some features and partner with these feature teams to figure out how we can have a better introduction into that feature, or maybe how do we start to connect some of these features into a user journey to build some of these habit loops. And so, like, I'd say that's part of the one of our big focuses right now. But yeah, that's, I think what's interesting is, like, if you look at Hunt on the adoption curve, we're way later on there. And so like the experience just has to get more simple for our users, especially for that demographic also skews a little bit older. Like, I always think
Mm-hmm.
about my dad trying to sign up for this product, and like him fumbling through, like, trying to figure out what these things are. And so that's why we really
Mm-hmm.
need to break it down to its simplicity.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And one of my favorite reports to read every year is Revenue Cat's annual app growth report. And one of the data points that really stuck with me the last couple of years is more than 80% of trial starts for freemium subscription apps happen in the first 24 hours, which usually means the first session and oftentimes means the first 60 seconds. And so I think it can be so easy, especially if you're somebody who's working on a product that you're personally passionate about and you're a power user. It can be so easy to look past the fact the majority of your users, your new users in particular, like they're just getting started. They're just dipping their toe in the water. And so you really have to focus on the top of the funnel and making it as simple and accessible as possible. You did say you're starting to work on some more specific features as the growth team has matured at onX. So since 2023, my understanding is you've launched recent imagery, you've launched CarPlay and Android Auto, you've launched avalanche terrain mapping, and several others. So are there any particular features that the company has launched over these last few years that have been most important to the growth of the business?
Yeah, so we can maybe step through the verticals on some of the different features that have been launched there. But if you think about our hunt product, the hunt product was born in the West, and really it was around like the public and private lands and know where you stand. But a large majority of hunters live in the East and they hunt private land or land that they know really well.
Mm-hmm.
But a critical tool that they use as part of like being on their hunting land is trail cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And so for your audience, these are cameras that you set up on your property. They help
Mm-hmm.
you understand game movement and kind of what's happening. And so last year we launched the first integration with cellular trail cams. And so now that's a part of the experience that hooks right into the product. And so you can view your trail cam data right within the onX app. And then just this year we launched a partnership with Moultrie, which is one of the largest trail cam providers. And so I think for the audience that is more in the East around, private land hunting, like that's a big feature for that audience. And then you mentioned recent satellite imagery, like that's a game changer. If you like, for instance, like let's say you're planning an early spring backpacking trip. Well, you can go back into recent satellite imagery and move back through the weeks to see like at this time last year, was there water or was there ice or where was the snow line at this time? And so like that's kind of a game changer feature across the apps. And then this summer for off-road, a really unique, I'd say, opportunity where we worked with all the different land agencies to stitch together dispersed camping. And so historically, the way you would find dispersed camping is just camp illegally as you're traveling along a forest road, or maybe somebody drops some pins on where there's some dispersed camping, but that spot gets totally burned up because there's so many people there. But what we did is we worked with a lot of the different land agencies and actually stitched together all this data. So now a layer within our off-road app is dispersed camping. So you can see where it's legal to camp across the US now. And that's been a really exciting feature for this summer that's driven a lot of excitement from folks. And then there's like other features around like our turn by turn and our route building, capabilities that have also been really helpful for the backcountry user.
Got it. All very exciting features. And, I've heard some of this with AllTrails as well. One thing I have to say is with so many tech products, they're leading people to spend less time outside and more time online. And so it's really cool to hear stories about companies that are actually affecting people's experience of the real world, and especially people's experience of the real world in the great outdoors where, unfortunately, we're spending less and less time, I think, to our detriment.
But real quick on that, Phil, like it's interesting is like if you think about an activation metric, right? Like if our goal is ultimately to get you out, but how many times a year can you actually go do that? It represents this also like really interesting challenge from a growth perspective of like, what is that activation metric that we're trying to drive towards our users? Because it's not like Strava where, I can just hop and go do a run right after this call. But then you're also completely offline at that point. And so like, I think, and that's a big part of what drew me to onX is like, that is our mission, is to like get people out and into the outdoors.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the activation metric thing is a real challenge. I think anytime you have a business that isn't purely digital and where there's a lag between when you're exposed to the mobile app and when you can actually have the core atomic experience that the app is trying to support, it does present a unique set of challenges that have to be overcome. So let's transition to our last topic for today's episode, which is just around the competitive dynamic with AllTrails. And I have to bring this up because, you two are the big companies in this space, right? At this point, it's becoming a more mature market. And so I don't know what the exact market share figures are, but between AllTrails and onX, it's got to be at least 90+% of the outdoor activity tracking market, I would think. So let's start with, how does onX think about its target customer or set of customers? And how do you all try to differentiate who you are targeting with your product versus AllTrails?
Yeah. Well, first off, I mean, AllTrails is an amazing product. And I think they've done an incredible job, like as far as we mentioned earlier, around their SEO work into like actually using it. And, we use their product all the time for inspiration. Like I think their upgrade flows and how they think about that is really effective. But like I also think we're solving different users where
Mm-hmm.
they're going after much more of the casual hiker out on the weekend. Like
Mm-hmm.
here in the Front Range, like everyone is walking around with like looking down at their AllTrails map, which is great because it's getting people outside. And then, but for us, like we're really focused around the objective, what we call is like the objective oriented user. And this is somebody that has a goal in mind. They're trying to go do something.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're an archery elk hunter and you're e-scouting a different area that you're going to go out and use onX Hunt, on an 8-day backpack hunt, or you're a backcountry skier and there's certain objectives you want to try to go after in the spring. So it's much more like beyond just the casual use. It's kind of beyond that. And I think that's where the two different companies play. And yes, there's some overlap there, but we're not so much going after that casual use.
I love that. Well, and I think a lot of people, when they think about onX versus AllTrails, they probably think of it more in terms of the activity. And so they think of AllTrails as hiking and they think of onX as hunting or fishing or off-roading. But I think you added another dimension there, which is AllTrails has very intentionally gone after a more casual user segment. This was a huge part of the episode with Ron, was this pivot from extreme, backcountry skiers and search and rescue professionals who are the early adopters to the more mainstream casual audience of folks who just want to get out and hike on the weekends. Whereas with onX, and in some ways it is an extension of the verticals you've gone after, hunting and off-roading tend to attract a little bit more of a extreme audience, or at least a more experienced audience. But on top of that, you've made decisions that have oriented the product around a more experienced and high intent user segment. I guess related to that, you alluded to the fact that AllTrails has this great freemium on ramp where you can discover a trail through a Google search, and then you can download the app and use it for free. And then eventually maybe you subscribe. Does onX have more of a hard paywall? Like, how does onX work in terms of free versus paid and trial versus no trial?
Yeah, we kind of straddle like the trial model and the freemium model. So we do have free tiers, but they're not as robust as I'd say as like an AllTrails or a Strava. And I'd say we're more heavily focused on the monetization side, where it's more of a trial orientation. But I'd still say like it's an evolving discussion around how we think about this. And so yeah, we're constantly like reassessing where to draw that line. But again, it goes back to kind of the TAM that you're going after. And for, take Duolingo, right? Like that's a huge TAM to go after. And so they can afford to have all these free users in their user base. And like, it was interesting to hear in your AllTrails discussion around like, 90% of their user base is free.
Yeah.
Whereas like for us, like there's way more casual hikers out there than there are backcountry skiers. And so we approach that a little bit differently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've listened to podcasts with apps like Surfline or even chess.com might be a good example, right? If your TAM is narrower, then it forces you to be a little bit more thoughtful around just how aggressive you're going to be with monetization, because there aren't an infinite number of people out there who want to go hunt whitetails, right?
Exactly.
So that makes sense. And it's a good example of how the product ultimately is a function of the target market and the target customer. What do you think the biggest misconception is that people have when they compare onX to AllTrails?
I mean, honestly, I just think that like not as many people know of onX. AllTrails, it's won kind of, these Apple awards. It's just way more well known, and also through their like SEO strategy. You're just you cannot not run into AllTrails, right? And for us, I think we have this interesting challenge of the different vertical brands. Like you take Hunt, the red X logo that we have, and all like the communities that are within the different verticals that we have. And then you have the global onX brand.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still an opportunity for us to continue to grow the global onX brand. Like even in Denver here, most folks that I talk to have not heard of onX. Most folks I talk to in the CSS space have not heard of onX before. And I think that's an opportunity for us around like really trying to grow the brand from that perspective.
Yeah. Well, and it's the double-edged sword of focusing early on a more high intent, specialized user base, as there aren't as many of them, but the ones that you've attracted are fanatics, right? They absolutely love the product. And that's why onX has become synonymous with hunting. And so if you can build on that fervor and that momentum, then there's no reason to believe that one day onX can be every bit as large and successful as AllTrails has been. I guess last question before we switch to the lightning round here. So obviously, AI is likely to have an impact on just about every category over the coming years. With that in mind, are there any particular product innovations that you're excited about that could shape onX's future, whether they're using AI or not?
I think it's interesting. Like we were having this discussion earlier this year, and it's like we often talk of us as being like a map company,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, we're a data company.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's all just data points that are on the map that then get brought together to the user and how they interact with it. And so I think for us, as we start to reframe our thinking around being a data company and how are these different things connected, AI becomes a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps us to draw these connections much easier for the user. So therefore, then we can have a much more tailored experience for that user based on their needs. Where like today, for instance, like I'm a archery elk hunter and a backcountry skier.
Mm-hmm.
So I was using two different onX apps before I joined the company. But like in the future, you can imagine we were better understanding who these people's motivations are, and then how are we connecting our data set to then better tailor the experience for those users. And then for like particular features that we're building and stuff, there's definitely some exciting things in the pipeline, and our current customers and future customers are going to be pretty excited about them.
Yeah, I'm sure you can't speak to them in specifics, but that's exciting, and I'll look forward to those. All right, well, let's get to our lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. You just give me quick 2-3 sentence responses. First one that I always like to ask is just, what do you think is the best part about working at onX, and what's one thing you would change? And as a hunting enthusiast, I'm sure you'll have a good answer here.
Yeah, I mean, I think like for me, I wanted to combine my personal interest and passion with work, and so like I'd say there's two parts to it. One is like the culture of people is amazing. Like we get to have a ton of fun with the folks we work with because we all have very similar interests. So like there's a lot of things we can talk. There's a lot of commonality that we can talk about before we even get into the work. So like I love that part about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also just inspiring because like on Monday when you show up and you see in our different adventure channels like what people did over the weekend, it's like pretty incredible. So like to have that be part of your your kind of everyday work is pretty amazing. So like that's a big for me is like probably the best part about working at onX is just the like-minded folks that share similar passions.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not something I would change, but something that was super interesting that like took me a little while to adjust is I knew when I was coming into onX, like I knew the CEO was from Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that so much of the leadership team was from Amazon. And
Mm-hmm.
so the company has a lot of Amazon processes. So I've been like learning within like a mini little Amazon. And
Got it.
I think the biggest shift for me was like the doc culture, like creating
Yeah.
documents. And I've come from very heavy deck worlds. And so like the first meeting I showed up to was just like 30 minutes of reading and commenting. I was like, what is going on here? Like, what are people doing? And so like I've had to like completely shift how I work because I used to just work in decks.
Yeah.
And so that was just like a unique culture shift for me.
I've had that same experience. And I have to say, once you get used to the dot culture, it can be very, very powerful because writing really does force you to crystallize your thinking in a way that's much more rigorous and robust than you might in a slide deck. But
Yep.
man, it is definitely a transition. I went through that myself. Um, Second question, what was it like transitioning from a career in FinTech and B2B companies like Intuit, Lending Club, and Gusto to a consumer app like On?
So Lending Club was like B2C. And with that Lending Club, I got to work on a variety of different parts of the business. And that's where actually I got into like funnel optimization, experimentation, and stuff like that. So that's where I like started to get exposed to more and more of that work. And I was starting to like seek that out more because that's like I love that type of work. like the whole process of running experiments and the optimization, finding like where the little pockets of opportunity are. Um, and so like that transition was easy coming to onX.
Mm-hmm.
Now coming in particularly like with a growth team and consumer subscription, right? Like I had my little app on the side, but
Mm-hmm.
that's nothing compared to what onX is, right? And
Yeah.
so for me, that was like a really steep learning curve right away to like jump into that, because I was working on core payroll before coming to onX. Like those two worlds cannot be further apart.
Yeah.
Um, and so for me, it was like really relying on a lot of the resources that are out there. So like it was like hitting up folks like you. It was podcasts. It was, I think I've taken over 4 courses on Reforge.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just trying to be a sponge in these different areas to learn from other folks that have like who've been through this before to then bring back to onX.
Yeah, I mean, when you say all that, I'm a movie buff, so I have to go here. It reminds me of this scene in Good Will Hunting where they're at the bar and the fancy Harvard guy is talking about his fancy education, and then Will's just like, well, just go to the library and I'll save all this money and get the same education you did. And more, I think that's where the world's going with technology. It's like things are evolving so fast that taking courses are becoming more and more outmoded, at least traditional college courses, because by the time you take the course, the technology's already changed. And so I think there are a lot of benefits that accrue to the person who takes initiative and is able to just, you know, learn themselves through YouTube or podcasts or whatever else is out there. And it sounds like that's what you did. Um, Third question, as an avid hunter and outdoor enthusiast, what is it like to work at a company that's building a product you're so passionate about and directly serving customers just like you? I think we talked about this a little bit, but maybe what's one thing that you absolutely love about it, and what's one blind spot that it has created that you've had to figure out how to overcome?
Yeah. So it's all the reasons that I mentioned before, but like we get to solve problems for these communities that like I care a lot about. And then also there's a bigger thing there around public land and access that I care a lot about as well. And so like our mission of having these apps helps to pay for efforts around land access initiatives. And so like I'm totally aligned to that part of it, because
Mm-hmm.
we're not making any more public land. And so I feel like that's really important. So that's a big part of what drives me.
Mm-hmm.
And then being able to use these products and then share with my friends in the different communities and get their feedback on like, that's just like, that's just a cherry on the top from a product perspective,
Mm-hmm.
versus to like some of the other products that I mentioned earlier that I've worked on in the past. Uh, a blind spot is our busiest time of the year is hunting season, and
Yeah.
I joined the growth team, right? And so like we need to make sure we land all our impact ahead of that, and then things are set coming into the hunting season, or otherwise we're really busy. So I think that is like the double-edged sword with working on your passion. Is
You
does
have
it
time
cut
left for
into,
your passion.
do you have time left, or have you given yourself enough runway that you can get out and do that? But I think the actual blind spot though is like what I mentioned earlier, is the user research.
Yeah.
Like I what I want and what I expect is way different than somebody that's signing up today. And so you just can't skip that step. And I think in looking back, I wish we would have pushed on that sooner, to start more of that foundational research sooner.
Yeah.
And I might have been leaning on that crutch too hard in the beginning.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think you just got to tell your executive team it's a user research project. I've got a few hunting buddies and we're going to go out and it's user research. So I know
Yeah.
it's an important season, but this is critical.
Yeah. And
Um,
I will say though, like the company does a great job of supporting folks
yeah.
to get out. And like another funny thing too is like at all my previous other jobs, I kind of had to hide the fact that I hunted.
Yeah.
It was not something I could openly talk about unless I knew it was like something that you were interested in chatting about. But like
Yeah.
an onX is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's great to have that gift in that community. Last couple here, how has Onyx's focus on hunting and other outdoor activities shaped its culture? You were talking a little bit about that just now, but how do you see that in some of the policies or some of the approaches that you all take to building your product?
Well, one like really clear one is like we have specific days called get out and get active that you're allowed to go use to just go do the thing. And so that's kind of like there's like no question around like, hey, if you want to go out and let's say like folks on my team, like one of the folks on my team is a big climber, and the
Mm-hmm.
weather's right, and this is an objective that he wants to go do, like he get like go for it.
Yeah.
And so there's capacity built into like our planning to like support those types of things because we do have really passionate folks on our team. Um, and then the other thing I'd say too is like a unique thing is we do like a summer app challenge. And so on Fridays, folks need to get out and use the app. And it's actually where we do most of the debugging and we run into a lot of the kind of the other edge cases that we wouldn't normally expect.
Mhm.
But you're given time on Fridays during the summer to go out and actually use the products. And then they turn it into a little competition where of folks like basically based on the different base camps that we have, like who's tracking the most, who's dropping the most waypoints, or if they've used this particular feature that's been assigned that like needs to be tested. So that's built into it as well.
Cool. Yeah, well, Ron said the same thing at AllTrails. I think they have trail days, they call them, which is one Friday a month. Everybody gets out and does whatever hike or other activity they want to do. And what a great thing to build in your culture. It sounds like onX has done something very similar. Last question, we danced around it before, but I'll just ask you directly. How do you think AI is going to impact the outdoor activity space?
I'll go back to the dispersed camping example. Like we still had to work with the different land agencies to get the correct data
Hmm.
in order to like deliver that type of value to the end user. And I don't think that's something that we could just point AI at right now. Um, and so for us, I think, this is a tool that you take in the backcountry. You absolutely need to trust it in order to get home safely. And so
Hmm.
I think like when we think about the product, when I was chatting with some of the team around this, it's like, it for sure needs to be reliable. Like
Hmm.
it needs to work. The data needs to be relevant in the product and it also needs to be responsible.
Hmm.
And I don't think we're at the stage yet or would we want to trust just AI to run with that? Like,
Hmm.
especially when with our product is trusted by our users to actually get them home safely.
Yep.
Now to that point, like kind of what I mentioned earlier, like we have all these different pieces of data. Like at the end of the day, a data product. And
Hmm.
I think AI is going to open up a lot of opportunities for us to like to start to look at that data differently and maybe bucket it differently than we normally would.
Yep.
That could then present a different user experience to the user.
Yeah.
So that
I,
there's certainly something there, but I still think that we're at the stage where it's like a solution chasing a problem.
yeah, and I hear that from more and more companies. And again, like Ron brought it up actually on the AllTrails episode, which is there are so many opportunities to use AI to improve product experiences, but make sure that you're not just building technology in a search of a problem. Start with the customer problem that needs to be solved. And in cases like, well, we want to hyper personalize an experience for a particular type of user, okay, maybe great AI is a great tool for that. But in cases like, well, I'm going to be off the grid in the wilderness and I need a product that has been battle tested and proven to be able to get me home, then like maybe not where you want to be using cutting edge AI models just yet. This has been great, Brandon. I knew it would be, and it was a pleasure having you on. Anything else you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up here?
No, I mean, first off, Phil, thanks so much for having me and appreciate all your help over the last couple of years and support. I put a plug in for your course. Like I took the course and I love the value subscription framework that you have.
Mm-hmm.
I bring that to like our teams here when we talk about the different product teams that we have and how it works with growth. So like, I can't recommend the content and things that you put out. And then lastly, I would say just, for folks to check out onX. We have these three different now four apps: the hunt, off-road, backcountry, and fish. Given your flavor of outdoor activities, definitely check us out and give us a try.
Love it. Love it. Well, it's such a pleasure having you on, Brandon. Thanks again. And looking forward to seeing where you take things over the next few years.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil.